so don't stress out about it. You're fine. Don't stress out about it too much. So, we have this idea of gender. No, you're fine. We have this idea of gender as this binary thing. So we have boys over here and girls over here. And it would be awesome if that were true. It would be so great if that were true. It would be so convenient and simple if that were true. Alas, alas. So I want to see if, as a group, we can come up with different ways of defining gender. So the simple one is the one we learned as kids. What's the one we learned as kids? Boys have a... Thank you. And girls have a... So we have a...
Well, there were a lot of names.
I don't think I've ever gotten that as a response, but I like it. So we have genitals, which are absolutely a way of determining gender. And for lots of people, they work pretty well. What's another way of determining gender? Other than genitalia. If you run into someone on the street, are you going to use their genitalia to determine their gender? Hopefully not. Depends where you are and how friendly you are. So what do you do? How do you determine someone's gender?
How they're acting.
So I'm gonna say presentational, which can be behavior, which can be clothing choices, or hair, or makeup, or lack thereof. Genitalia, presentational. These are ways of determining gender. What else do we have? If you are on a form of birth control that is not a barrier method and is not abstinence, what is it probably? Hormonal. And what are the main big sex hormones? Oh my god, it's like pulling teeth. What are they? I know you know them.
Estrogen.
Estrogen and
Testosterone.
testosterone. Pretty good way of determining someone's gender for lots of people. If you're getting your blood work done, you're getting your estrogen levels checked, you're getting your testosterone levels checked, what else could a doctor look at that might give them hints about your gender? Chromosomes, XX and XY. And there are also some DNA markers, which we could split out into 5, so up to 5 different ways. Genital, presentation, chromosomes, hormones, DNA markers. What does that leave out? These are all relatively objective, meaning that someone on the outside is telling by looking at you what it is. What does that leave out? Yeah, and so the language I'm going to use is identity. So now we have 6. We have 6 for this thing that is supposed to be very simple. What else is there? If you are pulled over, what is going to be asked for?
Identification.
ID, and so we have legal gender. And legal gender is this idea that, again, it would be super convenient if it were simple. But it is not, because there is the DMV, which may or may not agree with the birth certificate, which may or may not agree with your passport, which may or may not agree with the Social Security Administration, which may or may not agree with your insurance company. So we have all of these different ways of thinking about legal gender. We're up to 7. What else you got? I've had one group get up to 10. Let's see if we can do that.
Social Security part?
I'm going to put that under legal gender, but absolutely, there are lots of different parts of that. We're going to make room. I see a chair right there. There's chairs in the next room. No, don't be. So we're up to 7. What else we got? When the great Iowa City volcano swallows us all, and thousands of years from now we are dug up and put on display in the museum, how will they determine our gender? Yes?
Skeleton.
Skeleton! We're up to 8. What else we got?
Name.
Absolutely. You could put that as part of presentation, you could put that as part of ID or legal, you could separate it out. Can we get one more? Can we get up to 10? Yeah.
What the parents say it is.
Absolutely. So assigned gender is absolutely an important gender choice. For most people, all of these match pretty well. For, depending on what surveys or studies you use, between 95 and 99% of people, these match pretty well. But if you think we're in a country with 300 million people, we're in a world with 7 billion people, 1% is still a really big number. And so you have populations who, for whatever reason, come on in, some of those may not match. I bet everyone here knows someone who the DMV just fucked up and put the wrong gender marker on their license, having nothing to do with identity.
They almost did that to me. I caught it though.
Yeah, and so we have this idea that gender is super objective and gender is super simple, and it would be so awesome if it were, but it is not. You are an awesome group. We got up to 10. I think we're good to get started. I don't know if you want to do a little intro or anything, or if we should dive in.
Yeah. All right.
right. So thank you everybody for coming. And yeah, if folks are comfortable sitting on the ground, awesome. Oh, it looks like Preston has a few more chairs. You guys want some chairs?
This looks like a group that can sit on laps.
Yes, I mean, lap sitting is absolutely acceptable. Standing if people want to. So I just want to say welcome from Trans Collaborations. Pass some chairs in here. And I'll put some in the back. Awesome.
There's no black. You can sneak out here. It's going to say senior. Is this easier for people if I'm up here?
Yeah.
Holy shit, look at this stage we just made.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Yeah, extra. You're good. Go for it. Awesome. All right, can I step up on your stage?
I guess. You have my consent to come up on my stage.
Okay, so welcome everybody to No Gender Left Behind by our fabulous presenter, Rebecca Kling. I just want to say a welcome from Trans Collaborations. A few housekeeping things. There's a bunch of food on this table in here, and I know that we're all kind of crowded, but if folks want to take a couple minutes to get something to eat, something to drink, and then sit back down, that's awesome. If not, we can do that afterwards as well. And there's also restrooms. There is a gender-neutral, accessible bathroom. It's obviously a little bit hard to get to right now, but if you go in this hallway all the way to the back and on the right, there's a bathroom there. And the light switch is outside. It's kind of hard to find. And I also want to take a quick moment to thank our sponsors of this event, which include the LGBT Resource Center, where we are now. And come on in, guys. Come in.
We're going to do it. I have faith.
Yeah. And also the University of Iowa Student Government, the Executive Council of Graduate and Professional Students, Fairgrounds Coffee House, and Mama's Deli. And I think we can go ahead and get started unless folks want to take a minute to go get some food.
I think it's going to take longer than
I think it might take longer. Okay. All right. If you guys want to during.
If you are dying of
Yeah.
starvation, I will not
Go
take
for
it
it.
personally if you go get food.
Yes.
Let's
All
put it that
right.
way.
And wait.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, members of the press, America is in a state of crisis. Across our great nation, people who don't quite fit into our idea of what it means to be a man or a woman are in danger. These people teach in our schools, they live in our communities, they are our brothers and fathers and sisters and mothers, and they are at risk. As well they should be. I stand before you to tell that these people threaten the very foundation of our great republic. Our nation will be destroyed unless we stand up against these perverts, these freaks, these cross-dressers and transsexuals. It is with great pride and pleasure that I stand before you to announce the passage of House Bill 217, the No Gender Left Behind Act, a reform of gender for this great nation. The No Gender Left Behind Act embodies the President's key proposals for gender reform, including accountability, support, and an emphasis on gender-affirming education, which has been proven to work. It's not like we're just making this up as we go along. This agreement results in a fundamental reworking of the role of the United States government as gender police. It is the most founding moment of gender since the dawn of our great republic. And we will not rest until every American knows their proper place as a man or a woman. Thank you, and may God continue to bless America. Tepid applause. In 2010, the National Center for Transgender Equality worked with the Gay and Lesbian Task Force, surveying 6,500 transgender and gender nonconforming people. The survey, which was the largest of its kind to date, was called Injustice at Every Turn. From that report, quote, "A lot of people tell me I'm lucky because I pass, and I'm considered beautiful as a transgender woman, but I sure don't feel lucky. I'm always fearful every time I step out of the door that someone will harass or physically harm me. On October 5th, 2010, I was fired for being trans. For being a trans woman, transgender, transsexual, a chick with a dick. You can do it. We're good. I had been hired to teach an 8-week theater workshop in North Chicago, Illinois, over an hour north of actual Chicago, Illinois. And more specifically, I had been hired by the Piven Theater Workshop, who had been hired by the Boys and Girls Club of Lake County, who had been hired by the Neal Math and Science Academy. Neal, Boys and Girls Club, Piven, me. And so, on September 28th, 2010, I drove the hour or so up from Chicago to North Chicago, and I taught a 90-minute workshop on theater, games, and improv. It went really well. I met with the teacher beforehand. We talked about what she was hoping to get for her students. The class was rowdy and rambunctious 7th and 8th graders, but I drove back to Chicago feeling like the class was a success and glad that I had had another class to teach. So imagine my surprise on October 5th when I got a call from the Piven Theater Workshop saying that the class was being postponed indefinitely. Exactly. Postponed indefinitely. And no one was quite sure why. Over the next couple of days, details started to come trickling in. The students at the Neal Math and Science Academy had asked their teachers about my deep voice and big hands. It's at this point where I feel obligated to say that my hands are not freakishly huge. Because I can see where people's eyes go, and when I say big hands, everyone goes, wait, are they? They're not that big. And the teachers had gone to the administrator, and the administrator had gone to the principal, and the principal decided that my presence in the school would bring up uncomfortable conversation. That's the language that was used. Uncomfortable conversation. So the Neal Math and Science Academy asked the Piven Theater Workshop, through the Boys and Girls Club, if they could send a different teacher. Now, I have to give Piven a lot of credit. Piven was given the task of telling me that I had been fired for being trans, for not being womanly enough, for being a bringer of uncomfortable conversation. But Piven, to their eternal credit, said, actually, we sent a really great teacher, and if you're not comfortable with her, I guess we have to cancel the workshop. In that, I'm a rarity among trans people. I have primary employers who have stood by me through coming out, transitioning, living as an out trans woman. Still, they couldn't get that job back. They couldn't prevent me from being a target of bigotry and fear, which is particularly frustrating because Illinois is a state where it is illegal to fire someone for being trans. But it was over the phone, so I couldn't prove it. 90% of trans people have experienced some sort of harassment or job discrimination, and 26% now, including me, have been fired because they're trans. In the months following, I could barely talk about it without getting pulled into that emotion. This was not an abstract politician or religious leader saying that trans people are icky. This was a specific school administrator saying I was not qualified to teach their students. I was not qualified to be there because my presence in that classroom would bring up uncomfortable conversation. In the months and years since, I've given it a lot of thought about what that means. And more broadly, how we teach gender to kids, to adults, to each other. What would it mean? What gets included? And what gets left out? Left behind? The report Injustice at Every Turn contains tons of stories from trans and gender variant people, many of them instances of bigotry or hate. From that report, quote, "Shortly after I came out in high school, I began receiving threats on my locker. The usual sort of idiocy, damn dyke, no one wants you here, or fucking fag." What sort of education could prevent such bigotry? What sort of education would I have liked to get as a child? Good evening, class.
Good evening.
Yes, I apologize, but I did offer you a greeting. It's considered polite to return the greeting. Good evening, class.
Good evening.
Now, you may have heard about the No Gender Left Behind Act. It requires comprehensive gender education be taught alongside sex education. Throughout the country, people are learning from a curriculum that includes language like real men are and real women look like. I am pleased to report that we will not be using that curriculum in my classroom. As legal challenges to the No Gender Left Behind Act work their way through the courts, this school district has joined with others in rejecting that curriculum. We will be going from a slightly different playbook. Let's get started. Class, what's the first thing a doctor looks for upon the birth of a child? They record the height, the weight, and the sex. It's a boy or it's a girl. But what if it's not so obvious? What if a doctor looks between the baby's legs and says, it's a... This condition is generally called intersex, when a child has what is called ambiguous genitalia. As if a genitalia, a body, could be ambiguous. That's as silly as saying that chair is ambiguous. Language can be ambiguous. A body cannot be ambiguous. Nevertheless, the doctor will put down M or F on a birth certificate. Put it down without running chromosomal analyses, brain tests, genetic scans, or even asking the poor thing. And so every child, intersexed or not, is given an M or F and raised accordingly. Let's learn a new vocabulary word. Cisgender. C-I-S-G-E-N-D-E-R. Cisgender is a term for people who, on the whole, feel they fit with the gender assigned to them at birth. For whatever reason, these people feel mostly comfortable in that assigned gender. I bet some of you here tonight might be cisgender, even if you've never thought about it before. Transgender is a word for people who don't feel comfortable with the gender they were assigned at birth. For whatever reason, trans people feel that their sense of self should take primacy over the gender assigned at birth. Some people may reject this binary idea of gender entirely, with boys over here and girls over here, and identify as genderqueer or something similar. I know this can be confusing. Earlier this week you were all divided up, boys in one group and girls in another, and the gym teachers talked to you about sex ed. But what if someone in the boys group didn't feel like a boy, or someone in the girls group didn't feel like a girl? Furthermore, how do you talk about men who menstruate or women who stand up to pee? And how do you determine gender if you can't simply look between someone's legs? You ask, of course. Everyone here has a gender identity, a sense of themselves as a gendered being, even if you've never thought about it before. For some of you it may match, mostly or more or less, what you were assigned at birth. For some of you it may not. Now, across the country, your peers are learning a very different sort of gender education. But if you take nothing else away from this class, I encourage you to think of this. The body of a man is not that which has a penis, it is the body that belongs to a man. The body of a woman is not that which has a vagina, it is that which belongs to a woman. It can be complicated, I know, but our bodies mean what we say they mean. Our gender is what we say it is. And that's all there is to it. But I didn't get that education growing up. I didn't learn about cisgender and transgender and self-identification. And reading Injustice at Every Turn reminds me of the hardships that many trans and gender-variant people face. From that report, quote, I was kicked out of my house and out of college when I was 18. I became a street hooker, a drug abuser, thief, and drug dealer. When I reflect back, it's a miracle that I survived. I had so many close calls. I could have been murdered, committed suicide, contracted AIDS, or fatally overdosed. At every turn, we, the differently gendered, get left out, left behind. Even when it comes to the clothes we wear and the toys we play with. I never had a Barbie growing up. I had tons of stuffed animals, and I occasionally played with dolls at friends' houses, but I never had a Barbie. I thought I would need to somehow justify that. Why would a boy want a Barbie? This isn't a feeling I've entirely escaped. A while back, my mom gave me a gift bag for something, I don't remember the occasion, and it had comfy pajamas and a book that I had been talking about in a fashion magazine, Cosmo or the like. I put the comfy pajamas on that night, I started reading the book very soon after, but I didn't even open the fashion magazine, I didn't even take it out of the bag. I was worried that after so many years of hiding my gender, I would somehow need to justify this desire to feel girly. I was worried that someone, a friend or a family member, would see me reading it and think what exactly? That I'm a girl, that I'm an occasionally femme girl? None of those are big secrets, but I still felt that need to hide. My mom noticed the next time she was at my apartment, asked whether I had read the magazine, and I was embarrassed to say that I hadn't, and that there was nothing wrong with it, it was something wrong with me, this feeling of fear and worry, of exposure, of being seen as trying too hard to be a woman, seen as being trans. My roommate, a cis woman, that is a not trans woman, Annie, had no such worries. She picked up the magazine, started flipping through it, and walked out of my apartment, walked out of my bedroom with it. I haven't totally lost that fear, but I've gotten better about it. I've gotten better at identifying when I want to feel girly, when I want to feel femme, when I want to do things that I wasn't comfortable doing at 12 or at 16 or at 22. To that end, I recently bought my first Barbie. But I couldn't just walk into Target or Toys R Us and get one. That would be too simple. I bought a Barbie, a Skipper specifically, when I learned about a specific one. Growing Up Skipper. This is a Skipper from the late 70s, who, when you twist her arm, grows taller and develops breasts. I obviously needed to have one, so I hopped on eBay, and shortly thereafter, my very own Growing Up Skipper. It's a little subtle for stage, but you can sort of see, there she goes. And there's a little click, so you know it's done. Here, I can come through. It's intensely creepy. How cool would that be if that's how it worked? No hormones, no hair removal, just a little click so you know you're done. Actually, could I ask someone to help me out? It'll be easy, I promise. Okay, can you try on Growing Up Skipper just so you get how it works? So twist her arm forward. Yeah, keep going and it'll click. There you go. Could you try on me? Anything? Try the other way. Anything? Oh well. It was worth a try. And of course the first thing I did after I got her was take her top off, and it's super creepy because it's this rubbery skin that just... If you go on YouTube, you can see the ads from the 70s. Intensely creepy gendering. And she has different clothing for when she's a cute kid and a curvy teen. It's very, very weird. Being trans isn't all fun and games, and the report Injustice at Every Turn shows how dangerous it can be to be trans or gender variant. From that report, quote, "My worst experience involved how the police saw me and my Pennsylvania driver's license, which listed my sex when I was in New Jersey. I was held and verbally abused by 2 officers for a burnt-out tail lamp for about 45 minutes on the side of the road." I think a lot about how easily something like that could happen to me. Particularly because I travel a lot, I drive a lot, I have a very conspicuous car. Some of you may have seen covered in bumper stickers in the driveway. And so I worry about getting pulled over, but I've chosen to do this. To be an educator and advocate, to go to theater festivals and colleges and universities and talk with people. And when I'm really lucky, I get to talk with high school students. High school students, I really enjoy talking with. They're old enough to come up with really interesting questions, and they're young enough to actually ask them. They have an honesty and a forwardness that we sometimes lose as adults. I was in a high school class in Chicago a while back, and we'd been talking for about an hour about gender and sexuality. They'd been asking really good questions. And near the end of the hour, they started asking questions they may have been too shy to ask earlier. One of them, a boy near the back, raised his hand. So you, haven't had the surgery, right? And I said, no, I haven't. And you like women, right? And I said, I like lots of people, but yes, I like women. And you, if you did, have the surgery, how would sex with a woman work? And before I could answer, the girl sitting in front of him turned around and with a look of disdain and disappointment on her face, waved her fingers in front of him. Which is certainly one way that that can work. And I offer that as a gift to you. I know as a queer woman, it sometimes is difficult to tell who else is queer, who might be a potential partner. And so I highly encourage, if you're at an event, or on the bus, or at a bar, just find that person you think is cute and make that strong eye contact and wave your fingers. just to see what happens. Now, I obviously offer this as a joke. And so I was incredibly excited when earlier this summer I ran into someone at an event who said, oh my God, Rebecca, I saw your show, you did the hand wave thing, and I was at this queer event in Chicago and I saw someone across the space and she was really cute and I made eyes at her and we locked eyes and I waved my fingers. She had no idea what it meant, but she came over and we ended up making out in the bathroom. That's news you can use. Another one of the questions these students asked, and something I've been asked before, is do I regret anything about transitioning? And I gave them the answer I usually give, that no, I don't, and if anything, I regret not transitioning earlier. But I was thinking about it all that spring. It was a beautiful Chicago spring. Do I regret anything about transitioning? That thought and most others left my mind in May when I was admitted to the hospital with an infected gallbladder that ultimately needed to be removed. You can actually still see the scar. Here's where they removed it, and here and here and here are where they used the little scope to see while they were doing it. Pretty cool that the scar is that tiny. I was in the hospital from a Monday to a Friday, the longest I can remember being in a hospital. And it was scary. My mom was there the entire time. And when I got out, I said, you know, you didn't need to be there babysitting me. I'm an adult and can take care of myself in the hospital. I don't need you there 24/7. But she stopped me and reminded me of the horror stories I had told her of trans people being mistreated by medical providers. 28% of trans people have experienced some sort of harassment or discrimination at the hands of a medical provider, and 19% have been refused service outright. How easy it would have been for a doctor or a nurse or an administrator to refuse to respect my identity. Fortunately, they didn't. They did respect me, but my mom's watch, which at the time seemed like an overbearing mother, was a protection against that. When I got out of the hospital, I had lots of time to think about what it meant to be comfortable in one's body. Here I was, physically uncomfortable. I could barely sit up, I couldn't go to work, I couldn't drive. And as I started to heal up, the doctor said I was cleared to be active again. I could bike, I could go to the beach, although I was told not to get the scar sunburned. And with that, I started thinking about that question again. Do I regret anything about transitioning? Because I don't think I regret anything about transitioning, but I miss, it's silly, but I miss being able to go to the beach topless. Because before I transitioned, flat-chested and hairy, I could go to the beach in the tiniest Speedo I wanted. But now that I've transitioned, gotten hair removal, grown breasts, now that I like my body more, I have to cover more of it up. I did some research, and Chicago, like many places in the US, says that women need to keep their breasts covered. Everyone needs to keep their pubic hair, their genitals, their asshole covered. And I'm pretty okay with that. It's at least equitable. But only women need to keep their areolas and nipples covered. And of course they are vague at what women means. Because at what point in my transition did I cross that line? Was there a day where you could objectively say, now you need to cover up? I really want to test this, to go to the beach. For 3 more months I have a penis between my legs, and I would really like to try that law. What does it mean to be a woman, to be a man? Who tests and how are they sure? But it's scary, because I could be ticketed, I could be arrested, I could be taken to a lockup, or I could be beaten, or raped, or killed. Dozens of trans people are killed every year, often by the very people who are supposed to be protecting us. And it seems crazy that I could be the subject of so much hatred and violence for doing something as simple as taking off my top. Now, of course, I'm a troublemaker, particularly when I see something that I feel is wrong. And so I wanted to do that again this summer. I'm going to want to do it again next summer. Because at what point do they determine man and woman? My driver's license says F on it, but only because I lied at the DMV. Oh, there's a typo, could you please correct it? My insurance says F, but only because I left that question blank and they assumed Rebecca meant female. My birth certificate says M, but only because the state of Illinois thinks what's between my legs is more important than who I say I am. Which of those documents wins? Who gets to determine gender? And why is being bare-chested illegal now when it was legal just a few years ago? You can imagine a sound cue here to cover up the fact that I have to put clothing back on. Washington think that you need some gender education, and as usual, it falls on your physical education instructor to impart this wisdom. Now, I'm not a fancy man in a suit, but I think that phys ed should be about a good hustle. Be that as it may, we are devoting some time the next few weeks to gender education. Now, who can tell me what it means to be a boy? I can wait.
Go to the beach together.
False! Being a boy means you have a penis. Who can tell me what it means to be a girl? Really, that one's difficult now. Being a girl means you have a vagina. That is all there is to it. Gender is simple. How do people know if you're a boy or a girl? No, Susan, don't show them your vagina. That makes you a slut. You know you're a boy or a girl because you act like one. Damn it. Boys and girls are different. According to the National Association for Same-Sex Education, boys like the following things. Things that are dangerous. Things that are loud and lively. Authority figures. This is not funny. Snakes. Dynamite. Virus outbreaks. Girls don't like those things. They like talking about heterosexual relationships. Being emotional. Friendships and drama. That's science, and you can't argue with science. From now on, we'll be dividing the class into boys and girls. Boys will be learning football, basketball, soccer. Girls will be learning badminton, volleyball, and, I don't know, cheering. We'll also be grading not only on what you do, but how you look doing it. So boys, no more dodging and weaving when you're playing football. If you don't get hurt, you are not doing it properly. And girls, for God's sake, put on some makeup. All right, no complaining. 50 laps. And men don't complain, they drink. And girls, no complaining. Women don't complain, they develop eating disorders. And now it's caught in my earring. I'm just making it worse. It's going to take off my earrings. There we go. Have a seat. This is officer number 1738, interview with alleged victim of sexual assault. Name? Funny, you don't look like a Jennifer. Is that the name I find on your driver's license? Look at that, with an F and everything. Guess you can fake anything these days. Date of birth? Address? Did the incident happen within city limits? Please describe the nature of the alleged crime. Sir, I'm afraid... Right. Ma'am. Well, the medical report says you claim you were anally raped by a friend at a party at your own house. Is that correct? Miss Smith, have you ever engaged in anal sex before? I'm just trying to get a complete picture of what happened. Have you, in fact, engaged in anal sex before? Perhaps even with the individual you're now accusing of rape? So you admit you've had anal sex before with the very person you're now you're now accusing of raping you. Calling it victim-blaming bullshit isn't going to make this go any faster. If you ask me, it sounds like you got what you deserved. I feel naive sometimes imagining that any of that could change. That the way trans people are treated, the way gender is taught, the way we carry ourselves could change. Because life is easier when gender is simple. What's there to get upset about? What's there to start a revolution about? What's there to riot about? What's there to be angry about? It is so much easier to think of men as men and women as women and anyone else as freaks. I came out to my parents at 14. I used the best language I knew how. I think I want to be a girl. And they responded with love. My mom said, we will love you no matter what. My dad said, we will love you whatever you are, as long as you're not a Republican. Because really there's some things that are just too much to ask me. But while they said they loved me, it took them another decade to understand. Because by coming out to them, I was asking so many people in my life to rethink what gender means. To rethink gender as more than male and female. To rethink gender as something more than what a doctor says. It's a boy or it's a girl. I was asking them to turn gender around. The report Injustice at Every Turn isn't only filled with hardship. There is some hope. When I started coming out, living full-time in my real gender, I blossomed into an outgoing, loving, giving person. And I have to remember that it took me a while to get a grasp of gender. I pretend it was easy sometimes, but it wasn't. It took me just as much time as it took parents and friends and family. When I was a teenager, I would sometimes have conversations between myself and Rebecca, who was not yet myself. These conversations would usually start when I was feeling particularly sad or alone or male. She would begin, this Rebecca that I imagined myself as in an alternate universe, speaking to me across the barrier that separated our realities. She would start with kind and comforting words. But as I continued to stay closeted, continued to stay off hormones, continued to stay male, her tone would change. She would start encouraging me to inflict harm on myself, encouraging me to just end it all, just kill myself, because I was obviously never going to be a real woman, so why even bother trying? 46% of trans people have attempted suicide versus 1.6% for the general population. And I have to remind myself that Rebecca was wrong. She was worse than wrong. She was a liar and a bitch. She was every idea of gender that I got from Jerry Springer and The Crying Game and porn about she-males and chicks with dicks. And I wanted to be her so bad. I wanted to be her so bad. To have the vagina fairy fly through the window and say, poof, now you're a real girl. It wasn't that easy. But sometimes things are worth it when you have to work for them. My gender is my own, because I say so. My voice is my own, because I use it. My body is my own through hard work and a painful transition. And I have no intention of being left behind. Thank you. Thank you so much to the University of Iowa for bringing me here. I am going to put a couple of things out. I'm going to put out a mailing list. I send out about 1 email a month. I am also going to put out postcards from my most recent show, which was Get Ready for the Vagina Fairy. That show is sadly now over, but this does have my website, which is RebeccaKling.com. You can go there to learn about more work that I'm doing, as well as see videos from past productions. And you can donate to my surgery fundraiser. As I said, I am having gender reassignment surgery in December. It is fucking expensive. So I'm doing a Kickstarter model where you can donate and get postcards or vagina-themed paper fortune tellers or copies of my book. Or, because I take myself very seriously, you can get anatomically accurate reproductions of my genitalia in chocolate or candle form. 2 people thought that was funny, and everyone else was really uncomfortable. Up here, I also have copies of my book. You cannot take them because I'm donating them to the LGBT Resource Center and to the Women's Resource and Action Center. Action. But you can take a look. You can find them on my website. If you go to RebeccaKling.com, they are 15 on Amazon in a print edition, 5 on Amazon for ebook, or they're a free PDF download on my website. I think it's important that work like this be accessible because it was so fucking painful for it not to be accessible when I was growing up, and so I want people to be able to read it. Before we have food and chat, and if you need to get up and have food, you're more than welcome to do so. I do a talk back after every show. I do a Q&A, and I do that, and I talked about that a little bit last night, because I think there are entirely legitimate, valid, important questions that people have about trans identity that would be inappropriate to ask someone if you bumped into them at the coffee shop. And so I want to hold this as a safe space where if you have questions, you are allowed to ask them. I'm explicitly saying I am a person who you can ask in this context. That does not mean, I'm also explicitly saying you can email me. If I'm in Iowa City again and you run into me at the Wedge, which was super yummy, not an appropriate venue. Does that make sense? Does that distinction make sense? And the only other thing I want to say about questions, and this is what I said last night, I truly don't think there's such a thing as a stupid question, if you are asking with an intent to learn. There is, however, such a thing as a mean question. And that's the difference between, oh my god, where did you get those sandals? And, oh my god, where did you get those sandals? So if a question is being asked with the intent to learn, I will do my best to either answer it or talk about why I'm not comfortable answering it, but still give possible answers. If I think it's being asked with an intent to be mean, I will be mean in return. That's probably not true. Questions, thoughts, comments, scathing indictment, glorious praise. Yes?
Has your voice changed between the time that you got fired and now?
So, I'm going to answer that in a couple different ways. And I'm going to be mean and an asshole performer and take forever to answer it. Hormones are awesome. They are super powerful. Estrogen changes the body, testosterone changes the body. They unfortunately don't, estrogen specifically doesn't do much for voice, because once your vocal cords have been stretched out during puberty, they can't get unstretched out. Or they can't, that's probably not the anatomical reason. But going on estrogen does not raise your vocal pitch, is what I'm trying to say. Going on testosterone can deepen your vocal pitch some, because it is stretching the vocal cords out more. That said, I have made some conscious effort to raise the pitch of my voice. I'm a little under the weather now, so sometimes it goes down here. I have made some conscious effort to raise the tone of the pitch of my voice, and I felt incredibly uncomfortable that I was called on it this summer. I was at the Minnesota Fringe Festival, and one of my friends who I see only once a year at Fringe Festivals said, "Is your voice higher than it was last summer?" And it wasn't something that I had realized was that obvious, but apparently it was to him. So I, not specifically from that, I didn't sit down from that and go, well, fuck, I need to raise my voice. But it is something that I've made something of an effort to work on over the last couple of years. Because I have a background as a performer, I feel somewhat spoiled in that regard, because I have a background doing vocal work, and so have some training there. Does that answer your question? Other questions or thoughts or comments? Or we can just sit here in awkward silence. Yes?
Could you explain how it's more important to feel the transition to being a woman as opposed to being just a very feminine man? Like,
Absolutely.
why is it more important to make the jump?
I think that's a super important question, because one of the things that's tricky about gender is, first, there's this big overlap between gender and sexuality. So as someone who is primarily, although not exclusively, attracted to women, the dating market would be much, much simpler if I had stayed presenting as male. There are a lot more women interested in men than there are women interested in trans people. There's still enough women interested in trans people that I'm not complaining about my dating life, but it would have been a lot simpler. But we understand with the idea of bisexuality and heterosexuality and homosexuality and pansexuality, omnisexuality and asexuality, that gender and sexuality are not the same thing. That you, by presenting as female, I can't guarantee who you're attracted to simply by the way you're presenting. So we have this understanding that's come in the last couple of decades, that gender and sexuality are not the same thing. What's tricky about that then is when someone is trans, it throws an additional wrench in the works. And so the way I've tried to talk about it, and the way I've tried to think about it, is when I close my eyes and think about myself, my body and my presentation and my sense of self feels more right now than it did before I transitioned. And I wish I had a better way to describe it, but one of the things I've talked about is if I was the last person on earth, I would continue taking the hormones because it's important to me and to my sense of self. And one of the things that is tricky about being trans is we're expected to have eloquent justifications for wanting the bodies that many people, I'm not going to say everyone, many people were given by dumb luck. And so if you turn that question around, and I'm not asking you to answer it right now, but I am encouraging you to think about it. When did you first realize you wanted to be a woman? And thinking about it that way throws people off. Similarly, I'm going to have gender reassignment surgery in December. I'm going to have a surgically constructed vagina. And a question that comes up is, well, how do you know that's right for you? And again, turning that around, for the people in this room who have vaginas, and I'm not going to make assumptions about that, when did you know you wanted your vagina? Well, when you phrase it that way, it's viewed as sort of silly. Well, of course I want my genitalia because it's mine. But for trans people, we have that same desire for a body that fits our sense of self, but not always a great way of explaining it. Does that help? Does that make some sense? And I'd love if any other people here feel like they have better answers to that, or just different answers to jump in. The way that I've sort of been able to describe it, an analogy I use, is that being male for me was like when you're trying to get to sleep at night and you toss and turn, and you know you're fucking uncomfortable, but you're not sure what comfort would look like. And so I knew I was uncomfortable in male before I realized that I would be comfortable in female. And for some trans and gender variant people, they experiment and find comfort in different ways. I want to be clear that I am not the only experience of transness, and that there is no more or less valid way of being trans. And so for some people who might identify as trans or gender variant, being an effeminate male or being a butch or masculine female is going to feel right for them. For me, I didn't like the idea, I didn't want to be perceived as playing with masculine gender. I wanted to be perceived as being feminine gender. Does that sort of make sense? One of the things that it was really hard for me to start experimenting with clothing because it felt like cross-dressing. It felt like I had this awkward male body that I was trying to pretend was female, and I didn't want to pretend. I wanted to be. Does that make sense? Does that sort of kind of help?
Mm-hmm.
other questions? Yeah.
My question builds off of what you were just talking
Please.
about. I've been reading your blog, and in your most recent post, I saw that you were saying that you were reflecting upon your teenage years as a transgender person, and you were like being perceived and treated as male, but you did not receive girl socialization training. How did that turn out in college? And what, like?
So I started transitioning my senior year of college, and I started socially transitioning, meaning presenting and interacting as female, really after I graduated. So what I was talking about there is this is in part stemming from, I work with youth, I work with middle and high schoolers, both cis, so not transgender, and trans. And I've been thinking a lot the last couple of years of, as someone who transitioned post-adolescence, what is different about that experience? And in particular, coming out of a friend of mine who's been asking me and other trans people, what is a positive thing of being trans? And what I was talking about in that post, and what I've been thinking a lot about, is this idea that as someone who was perceived as male, I didn't identify as male, and I don't think I was really experiencing life as a man, but was perceived as male and was interacted with as if I were a real man, whatever that means. I missed, and I mean this somewhat negatively as missed, but mostly positively as missed, the social training that goes into gender in teenage years, which for women sucks. There is very, very little good about it. And so what I was thinking about is I feel like compared to some of my cis female friends, certainly not all of them, and watching some of the trans youth that I've worked with who are starting to transition at 12 or 13 or 14, I feel like because I started transitioning after all of that, I missed some of that shitty issues around gender and presentation. And so, for example, I think I have a much stronger sense of safety walking down the street at night than some of my female friends. Part of that comes from I'm relatively tall. I'm about 5'10". I am relatively wide build and strong enough that I feel like there's legitimate reasons that I don't feel as unsafe as some of them, but I also didn't have that training. And there's talk in feminist communities sometimes about male privilege, this idea that trans women carry male privilege, and that's usually framed as a negative. And I've been thinking a lot about male privilege is awesome. We should all feel comfortable walking home at night. We should all feel comfortable speaking up in groups. We should all feel comfortable with our bodies and with our senses of selves. And those are usually the ways male privilege are painted as negatives. As trans women don't know when to shut up, and trans women don't understand what it's like to really be a woman and to be scared of your physical safety. We should all feel that way. And so I feel like my missing out on that female socialization in many ways sucks. And if I could do it again, I would have transitioned earlier. It's not that I'm saying this is better. But with the life I have had, those are really good things to take from it. It sucks that I have prom pictures of me in a suit and tie. It sucks that I have bar mitzvah pictures of me in a suit and tie. I have memories of family events presenting as male. That I started dating as male. All of these things suck. But taking from that, and I don't feel like it's finding the silver lining, I feel like it's actually an awesome thing, a gift that I've been given, is that, I have had the opportunity to think about how I exist as a woman in a more self-reflexive way than any 14-year-old has ever given, ever in the history of everness. And that I do feel, I am trying to feel grateful about. I am occasionally able to feel grateful on days that I feel good about myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Absolutely. I also, and I talked about this a little in that post, the last thing before I go to another question, my ability to feel that way speaks hugely to the privilege that I carry. As a white person, as a middle-class person, as an educated person, as an able-bodied person, as a person who is usually perceived as cis on the street. And so I have friends who are just as smart and eloquent and passionate and activist as I am, who are going to get, hey tranny, yelled at them out of car windows. And so their experience of walking down the street is very, very different than mine. And I want to give the asterisk to that big, long answer that I do feel strongly about, that people with more visibly variant genders And both by how I present and just by dumb luck. I have nothing to do with the fact that my boobs came in really well when I went on estrogen. It does not speak well of me that they, like, it's not a thing that I did. It's fucking dumb luck. It doesn't speak well of me that I was able to afford $15,000 of hair removal. It speaks to a mom who had that money and really cared about me. And I want to make that asterisk about privilege that overarches all of that answer. Other questions or thoughts or comments? Yeah.
Do you think you would have gone through the trans process had you been socialized from birth as a girl?
I don't know. Is both the short answer and the true answer. What ifs are super tempting, and I get drawn into them really easily. If I had a genie's bottle at Fort Lamp bottle, if I had a handle of genie, at 14, I absolutely would have made that change to be a cis girl. At 18, I absolutely, at 22 probably. At 25, it starts to get harder. Now that I've had this time of being who I am, it would mean giving up doing stuff like this. And so, as a child, I absolutely would have taken that option. The further I get from my transition, the harder it is to rewrite that history. Other questions? Yeah.
Do you feel like, maybe this is, I guess I'm just asking about your personal experience, but do you feel like there was conflict between, like, your expression and what you felt like you needed to do to pass as a woman? Like, do you feel like you, like, have to wear earrings or have to dress a certain way to pass as a woman?
So that goes back to my experience of privilege, that I feel pretty lucky that my choice of the way I enjoy presenting is relatively binary, meaning that it fits relatively within traditional gender roles. And again, because of luck and money, I'm able to do it pretty well. And so I am sure that part of that is socialization pressure, because we can never separate that from our true identity. Like, I think that's a false dichotomy. But I do enjoy presenting as comfortable in my gender. I'm more comfortable with playing with that. So I got my first vest since I was like 12 the other day. And for me, that felt like a playing with gender in a way that is still clearly feminine on my body and in the way that I'm wearing it. But it's something that I wouldn't have been comfortable doing a couple years ago because it did feel too masculine. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah.
I also, every 6 months, pretend that I'm going to cut my hair really short. I've had my hair about this length since high school. It was the first visible change that I made around my gender. And every 6 months I pretend I'm going to cut it really short. And I don't. And part of the reason is because I do like having long hair. And part of the reason is because I know it is a visible sign of gender. And it is scary to me as someone who is able to walk through the world and not be perceived as trans, to feel like that would regender me in eyes of others. And even scarier to feel like that might be something that I would look in the mirror and see myself differently with short hair. And that's, I don't love admitting that, but that's a true answer to that question. Other questions? How are we doing on time? Okay, so well, if people need to sneak out, I won't be horribly hurt, but we can keep chatting if people have other questions. Or stony silence. Alright, I'm going to hang around for a while so we can get food and we can continue chatting. If you want to check out my books, please don't take these copies. Sign up for my mailing list. I send out about one a month. You can, grab a postcard for a show that is no longer going on right now, unfortunately, but has my website and has some other contact info. Please feel free to reach out to me through email, Facebook, Twitter, carrier pigeon, smoke signal. From Rebecca Kling, I also have links to my blog, which is what you were talking about, and I post about whatever stuff I feel like. So I post about gender, I posted a review of my watch, because I'm a giant dork. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you so much to Zeke and, let's see if I can remember everyone, Trans Collaboration and the LGBT Resource Center and the Women's Resource and Action Center for bringing me to University of Iowa. Thank you.